It is Saturday, March 15th, and welcome back to another broadcast. Sam Faddis, why is the Russian negotiator rejecting the temporary ceasefire that the Ukrainians and the Americans have negotiated?
Well, I think, first of all, because the Russians are really busy killing all the Ukrainian soldiers on Russian soil in Kursk. So they're not going to accept any ceasefire until they have completed that process. As bloodthirsty as that sounds, that's the way it works. I expect you will see, as you would expect with any negotiation, a counteroffer, which will include some additional terms. They're basically not going to let Zelensky catch his breath until he signs on to more details.
How desperate is Zelensky, and how serious should we take the threat that the U.S. would levy financial sanctions against Russia if they don't come to the negotiating table?
I think you could take very seriously the fact that we're going to levy sanctions. Look, Trump is going to negotiate, so he's going to twist arms and cajole, alternately inflicting pain or giving concessions as necessary to get a peace deal. So this is going to seesaw back and forth. Look, Zelensky ought to be really desperate because he's in a bad situation. I mean, to what extent his ego is interfering with his capacity to negotiate in a rational fashion, I think that's the real question. By putting Trump in a position where Trump cut off intel support and temporarily suspended military aid while simultaneously Ukrainian soldiers were being surrounded in Kursk is about the most self-destructive thing you can imagine, and yet the guy did it.
Do you lay all the blame at Zelensky's feet? And since the president did do these things, and he's put military support, he's continuing again in Ukraine, didn't he allow Russia to take advantage of the opportunity? And couldn't some say in foreign policy circles that Russia, through its long wait and patience, is finally getting what it wants?
Look, do I assign all blame for everything that's going on with this to Zelensky? By no means. As I've said a million times, Vladimir Putin's a thug, and let's not forget the fact that he's the one that started the war. And whatever his concerns, he was not justified in trying to invade and occupy Ukraine. I'm just saying that when you are Zelensky and you're basically the only reason your country continues to exist is because of the United States of America, it's probably not a really good idea to torque him off and behave the way you did in the Oval Office, whatever you think of Trump. That's a self-destructive action.
What will bring about an agreement, not a temporary one, to just halt this killing and this war that's gone on for too long?
Well, I mean, on the Ukrainian side, you're going to have to accept the fact that you're not going to join NATO and you're never going to get all your territory back. And on the Russian side, they're going to have to accept the fact that they just suffered absolutely catastrophic losses, 3 years of war, to in the end gain a tiny amount of territory along the border with Ukraine. They're pulling 50, 60-year-old tanks out of mothballs and sending them to the front. So this certainly did not turn out the way Putin wanted, and he has been exposed in front of the world as incapable of achieving his goals. Those are huge things for him.
You know, Ryan Mcbeth, you're our intelligence analyst, and Sam just mentioned NATO and Ukraine. You just left NATO, you just left Europe. What is it feeling about all that is going on, given the fact that that warm drug of weapons, which Europeans depend on so much, which Obama warned them of, to at least put 2% in their budget, and some decided to, others ignored it. But all of a sudden, there's a grave reality that that warm drug of weaponry is over. And whether you like it or not, America is no longer going to continue this drug for supplying weaponry to Europe.
So it depends on the country that you're actually in. If you're in France, you're pretty much ready to go because France doesn't really purchase American weapon systems. If you're in Germany, you're a little worried. If you're in Poland, you're a little worried, even though Poland is trying to raise their army up to 6 divisions and just purchased the F-35. I believe they're taking delivery very soon of that particular weapon system. If you're Romania, you're also worried. Romania is trying to upgrade its army to NATO standards. So right now, Europe is very worried because they've been left holding the bag when it comes to Ukraine. And as you go further east, more and more people get worried. Now, when you take a look at a country like France, they're ready to go. But if you look at Poland, it's cool to be in the reserves again. If you're in college, you're not going to get a girlfriend unless you're in the reserves, because your girlfriend is probably in the reserves. So that's kind of the attitude in Poland right now.
And NATO?
NATO is frightened. NATO is frightened. You know, for years we've told NATO, look, you need to start, told European countries, you need to start spending at least 2% on defense. Some countries did. Poland's a good example. France has always done this. The UK is building up their forces. I never personally thought I'd see a time when Germany had more, or Spain had more tanks than Germany. That just kind of blows my mind, but kind of here we are. But just generally, NATO would love to do things on their own without the U.S. A good example is a no-fly zone over Ukraine. They have the AWACS, the Airborne Early Warning Control Systems that can look for enemy planes. They have the fighters. One thing they don't have without the U.S. is the actual software that can tie all that information together, because they've always relied on the United States. So this is something they really have to look at going forward.
You know, Ryan, you cannot argue the fact that Trump clamping down, shutting down the invasion on our border is the best thing for America. We need to know exactly who's coming into our country. And also something that Trump has talked about that no one has talked about is that America needs to get back to shipbuilding.
You're absolutely correct. So one of the things that I said when the previous administration was in office was that President Biden could close the border like that. And I'm a big believer in immigration. My family's from Northern Ireland. This is the most amazing country ever. But I can tell you that the kind of the definitions of a country is where you say this is where your laws stop and our laws start. And we need to know who's coming over the border. And also there is a defense component to that. You have Chinese coming over the border. You could have Iranians coming over the border. We need to know who's coming into the country. So that was very smart. The other issue that we have is right now we can only build 1.5 destroyers per year. And China is pumping them out like crazy. So the president's new initiative and creating an office of shipbuilding is very, very smart. Because what he's doing right now is he's kind of sealing America's future in the shipbuilding industry, because a country that can't build its own ships cannot defend its interests on the high seas.
Dr. Fofack, you're an economist, and you're looking at the economic impact that all these trade wars that are going on between Canada, Mexico, Europe, the retaliation. Trump is talking about 200%. Where does all this lead us, and where is the voice of reason before this really gets out of hand?
No, thank you. I think I would like to first go back to the shipbuilding issue that you raised.
No, we're going to get a chance to go back to whatever everybody said, but right now we want you to discuss the tariffs and the economy.
I think we're getting to the point we have the current administration, which has seen tariff as the alpha and omega of America revival. And you've seen the tariff being used as a tool for revenue mobilizations. The tariff being used as a tool for actually rebuilding the American manufacturing industries. As a tariff being used as a tool to bring the U.S. fiscal deficit in order. And in doing that, we've raised some challenges in terms of volatility in the market. We've raised some challenges in terms of risk of inflation. It's going to be inflationary. It's been actually, in the economic arena, the argument has been to say, to the extent that the U.S. trade with Canada and Mexico is only 28%, less than 30%, while Canada and Mexico depend heavily on the U.S., the impact of tariff will be minimal on the U.S. and more significant on countries such as Mexico and Canada. But it turns out that when you inflict tariff, It affects supply chains because of the way the world economy has been integrated, deeply integrated. It affects both intermediate but also final goods. So it tends to be inflationary. As a result of that, we've seen volatility in the market. But what has also happened, which is quite significant, is that the Fed has decided not to taper down the interest rate, which means that we may stay within the range of 4.5 to 4.7%. And as we keep interest rate high, we'll have implications in terms of investment growth, in terms of economic growth. So you see some effect on monetary policies. You see some effect shock on inflationary, but also have some implication in terms of the overall geopolitics and energy. And those are the consequences we have to face. But the idea of rebuilding the U.S. manufacturing through trade and tariff is something very noble, because one of the main reasons why we actually have this huge and mammoth deficit in the U.S. year after year is linked to excess consumptions and the fact that we depend on essentially, largely on Asian country for most of the manufactured goods that we consume.
Now, your comments about the shipbuilding?
Yes, on the shipbuilding, I think, and last year there was a very comprehensive review in the paper about the fact that more than 90% of the shipbuilding today in the world was global compositions, was happening in Asia, with Korea, South Korea, China, and Japan the lead. And the US was less than 5%, and Europe the rest. And you're right, I think it's very difficult to be a global leader if you can really lead in maritime side. And so it is a good investment. But the challenge we see, even in the, if you link that to the discussion we are having in terms of tariff, is that it will require a lot of effort in terms of rebuilding the infrastructure, but also the human resource and capacity to be able to deliver the shipbuilding. And we did a lot. We did a lot of this in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, because we're actually investing a lot into engineering, churning out good engineers to do this. We've actually shifted away from manufacturing toward the services, which now account for more than 70, 80% of the US GDP. So we may have to make a major U-turn to go back to manufacturing, requiring a lot of human resources, specifically in the engineering and sound side.
And I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. And welcome back to the broadcast. Sam, Faddis, give us an overview of our foreign policy and where we should be concerned and where you think we are making substantial progress.
Well, look, I think that the centerpiece of our foreign policy should be this concept of America first, right? So people try to paint Trump as an isolationist. He's not an isolationist. He's more of a realist. We don't need to be involved everywhere. We can't be involved everywhere. And when we are involved, we should actually be involved with those things that are important to the United States in terms of national security. Pretty common sense approach. What should be concerned about? First and foremost, probably existentially China. Not probably. We have enriched them. We have made them more powerful. They were supposedly going to liberalize when we engaged with them economically. That didn't happen. All we did was make the dragon bigger and more dangerous. You know, we need to get the Russia-Ukraine conflict tamped down before it spirals out of control, as so many wars have in the past, and goes off the rails and takes us into something nobody wanted. We need to be really concerned about Islamic terrorism, because it didn't go away just because people stopped talking about it. Syria's up in flames right now. Al-Qaeda is reconstituting in Afghanistan. And, we need to be concerned about what I would call rogue states. That's not a particularly accurate term, but for the sake of simplicity. So, for instance, the Iranians, who either have a nuclear weapon, multiple nuclear weapons already, or are standing so close to having them that I'm not sure it's really possible for us to stop them. And that'll be a really bad thing, because that will probably mean a nuclear exchange in the Middle East. That's enough to get us started, Armstrong.
Dr. Fofack, the continuing growing influence of BRICS and its economic impact, should that concern us?
I think it's a reality, and the BRICS, which have essentially overtaken the G7 countries in terms of GDP and purchasing power parity, are a growing force, and it should concern us.
So you think they pose a threat to Western financial dominance?
I think they pose a threat for several reasons. I think the first reason is that at some point in the 70s, we had the petrodollars, which became the anchor of the US dollars. And then I think Saudi Arabia depended on US heavily for export of its oil. And then as we achieve energy independence, turn to shale oil, and China became Saudi Arabia's main trading partner. And as a result, they can actually now move to the petro yuan. So you can see the link here between the BRICS and the monetary side in the long run. So ultimately, there's no reason for Saudi Arabia to actually sell its oil essentially in US dollars, since the main trading partner he has now is China. That's just one aspect. The second aspect is, as the BRICS, which started as a group of 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, actually expand to include a much larger number of countries, then that opened the possibility to actually hedge against any sanctions or tariff, because they're actually broadening the market size. In part, you can see that China has been less affected by sanctions because it's the first trading nation in the world with more than 120 countries as the top trading nations. Countries like Canada and Mexico, which are heavily pegged to the US when it comes to trade, are more affected by sanctions. So the BRICS essentially create room for hedging against future sanctions by the size of the market.
No, you're pushing, you're agreeing with him. We're all agree with him. I'd like for you to give your thoughts on that, and also whether or not the push for made in America manufacturing sustainable, or does globalization still offer the best economic path forward?
That's an excellent question. I can tell you that during the pandemic, it shocked me that we only had one factory that made masks. It's a mask. We can't make a mask. So I certainly think that made in America manufacturing is necessary, mainly because we're looking at things like just everyday items that can be turned off by a foreign country. And when it comes to things like chips, we have a national stockpile of cheese. It's in a cave in Missouri. We have a national petroleum stockpile, but we don't have a national chip stockpile. And you can't manufacture high-tech weapons or missiles without something like chips. So I definitely think we need to start bringing more manufacturing back to the United States of America, mainly because we can't defend our country if we rely on countries like China to supply things as simple as ballpoint pens.
I found it interesting that Sam mentioned about Iran's nuclear program. And I read a piece of his in A&D magazine, is whether or not the United States can stop Iran from building a nuclear weapon, which gave me the impression that Sam was saying in his article they have not yet achieved this goal. So I just need clarification from you on Sam, because you said because maybe they have already built this. And then how do we balance national security, Sam? We're concerned with this economic competition when it comes to trade with China?
Well, first of all, in regard to the Iranians, the short answer is we don't know. And all I'm really trying to say is this assumption that they have not yet acquired a nuclear weapon, finished constructing it, or that we can actually somehow intervene between where they are and completion. I think that's one of those kind of assumptions that in national security circles we need to revisit. Why are we so sure that is the case? Why are we so sure, for instance, that they're enriched uranium and then afterward they're going to build the device in which to use the HEU? Nobody's done that before. That's not the way the Chinese did it. They built the bomb and then they finished enriching the uranium and stuck it in the bomb and blew it up. Took them like 3 days from the time they had the HEU. The Iranians wasted all this time enriching uranium and then only now are going to begin the process of developing the device. And also our intelligence is so good, come on, that we know precisely. I will guarantee you our intelligence is not that good. Let's put it this way, put it that way.
But you also wrote, let's give praise for capturing the Abbey attacker. But let's now focus on capturing those that are yet to attack.
Yeah, well, two things about the Abbey guy. Based on what I know, I have confidence that he was involved in the attack. Therefore, I'm glad he's off the street and he deserves what he gets. Characterizing him as the mastermind, like he's really a big fish, strikes me as one of those things that the Pakistanis tell us because they think they're getting brownie points. We got this guy, he was a bit player, but we're going to play him up as being, we're going to play him up as being a big deal and get credit for that. And accept that on our side, we're going to be really happy to run with that because it makes us look good. But my central point is this. Intelligence services are not, you don't pay them so that years after an attack, you can go track down and find the bad guys who killed your people. I mean, if that's what happens, they should do that. But what you really pay them to do is tell you about the attack that hasn't happened yet and who's going to carry it out, and then take those guys off the street, and then nobody reads about an attack and no flag-draped coffins come home. And I have seen that done, and I have worked with people that have done that, and it is possible. Is it easy? No, it's not. But that's the real point, and the real issue we ought to be considering on American intelligence is, again, it's great that you found bin Laden 10 years after he carried out 9/11 and took him off the battlefield. Nobody shed a tear. Would have been a lot better if you'd had somebody inside Al-Qaeda and those towers never went down and 3,000 people didn't die. We stood up CIA in the first place so there would never be another Pearl Harbor. That was the explicit reason we did that. Okay, that we need to get back to that, and flat out, we are not in a position right now to do that. We are not collecting that intelligence.
I think that's an excellent, exceptional point, Sam Faddis. You know, Dr. Fofack, you know, you talk about terrorists, and you talk about it so eloquently and so expertly. Is this still an effective tool in trade disputes, or do they ultimately hurt American consumers more than our foreign adversaries?
And I have to say that when you are the leading producer and controlling the entire manufacturing space, but also the technology, it can be a very effective tool. And we saw that in the 70s and maybe even in the 80s, when we actually were a global manufacturing powerhouse and a leading technological country. We are still very strong technologically, but we are no longer very good in manufacturing space. Therefore, the use of sanctions and tariff tend to be very limited because there's always an alternative, and then people are able to hedge against some of these sanctions and tariff. But in the immediate short term, you've seen the impact of this tariff when it comes to volatility in the market. We've also seen the impact of this tariff when it comes to the issue of potential inflationary effect of it. And definitely, in the short term, it's not sure that it will actually address the deficit we are so much talking about, because the supply chain are so intertwined. But it may come with a cost. If we really go that route to really mitigate the deficit we have, there will be short-term cost. And now we're prepared to fathom this cost is the issue that we have to discuss. But it's no longer as effective as if the US were essentially the major manufacturing powerhouse in the world. We are more exposed now.
This is the place to be. I'm Armstrong Williams. Place to be for dialogue. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Now, Sam Faddis, I want to talk about Mahmoud Khalil, somebody they're trying to use as a call celeb. I'd like to remind our audience that a green card comes with legal obligations, including the disavowal of terrorism. This is under 8 U.S. Code 1182. An alien is an inadmissible if he or she endorses or espouses terrorist activity or persuade others to endorse or espouse terrorist activity, or is a representative of a political, social, or other group that endorses or espouses terrorist activity. Let me tell you this. Mr. Mahmoud Khalil violated that obligation, okay? He belongs to Columbia University, apartheid divest, which is known as Quad, and was a lead negotiator during last spring's anti-Israel encampment on the campus. Those protests glorified Hamas. They were a key player in the school's encampment, which was, listen to me, a Zionist-free zone. You know what that is? It is a designation that excluded Jews from a large part of the campus. And so in October 2024, Quad formalized its support for Hamas and celebrated the October 7th, 2023 massacre. And in a statement revoking an apology the group had made for the remark of this member, Kamani James, that Zionists don't deserve to live. The group said that apology didn't represent Quad values or political lines. And they added, we support liberation by any means necessary, including what? Armed resistance. You know what armed resistance is? Guns. But let me just say this, and I'm talking to Sam, and to a less extent, my man, I'm talking to you also, I'm talking to you. Let me just say this. All of this would not have been far less fraught if Columbia had taken Ryan and Sam disciplinary action, including expulsion, against protesters who targeted Jewish students, occupied campus buildings, and violated campus rules and civil rights laws. Foreign students would have lost their student visas, facilitating their deportation. In Columbia, as well as UCLA, Harvard, and all these other schools wouldn't have emboldened groups like Quad and the Students for Justice in Palestine. So to try to make Mahmoud Khalil, some celebrity, is ridiculous. He violated the oath he signed when he became a green card holder. Sam.
Can I just say amen? Is that an acceptable response? Amen. Look, every terrorist organization in the world, well, virtually every terrorist organization in the world has two wings. There's the military wing, the guys that go out and blow stuff up, and then there's a much bigger, broader political wing. Students for Justice in Palestine is effectively the political wing of Hamas inside the United States. So we're talking about one guy, but the fact that the federal government has tolerated their actions and affiliated other groups all over the United States is reprehensible. They should have been shut down and torn out by the roots. This is not about political expression, as you have very clearly said. This is about encouraging violence, advocating violence. This is about explicitly actually advocating genocide on U.S. soil. And that's been going, it went on in Colombia, went on all over the United States, still goes on. We shouldn't tolerate it. We should shut it down. This ought to be the beginning of a process of tearing that thing out by the roots, the end of nothing.
And Ryan, it should send a chilling, undeniable message to anyone else on college campuses, especially if you're a foreign student who will try to follow suit. That these are the consequences. They're going to deport you.
You're absolutely right. I mean, my family came to this country. I've never once had to worry about whether I was walking down the street in a Catholic or a Protestant neighborhood. I've never had to worry or fear for my life because of my family is Protestant. And I can tell you that some people, they come to the country and they wear nice clothes and they marry an American wife and they use all of our freedoms against us to disparage the country that they choose to live in. I am very grateful that I am an American instead of living in Northern Ireland, even though it has gotten better over the years. There's always a chance I might not have survived the troubles to get to where I am today. So the idea of disparaging the country that you chose is just so crazy to me. I certainly hope that other people look at this gentleman and they follow an anti-example and choose not to take that path.
Let me just stay with you a minute. Should we be concerned about North Korea?
That depends, because North Korea is currently gaining Russian missile technology. While North Korea's main goal is to stay in power, they are essentially a kleptocracy, right? I don't actually see North Korea invading South Korea. I don't necessarily North Korea shooting a missile at the United States, but I can see North Korea slowly becoming more militarily capable. So that's something that I believe we should be concerned about.
Dr. Fofack, I noticed you mentioned something about inflation earlier. You know, just this past Wednesday, I mean, we were stunned that inflation was not what we thought it was. It was much better than was predicted. And they're saying that these tariffs are only targeted for a certain part of the economy, not the whole economy. And what contributes to the economy is what Biden and those did in the last administration, all the spending, and guess how they were doing it? Printing money. Printing money is what contributes to inflation, more so than what Trump is doing right now in trying to negotiate better trade agreements with his allies and his adversaries.
Yes, I think you are sounding like Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman about money printing and inflation. It's true that there are several components of inflation. I think money printing is a main driver. But also the issue of supply and demand. And the supply and demand, is also a very important aspect of inflation drivers. And quite frankly, if you look at the way the supply chains are configured, as we hit the tariff brake and then increase it, and then you can pass some of those to the supply intermediate goods, which will ultimately have an impact on inflation. If you take another example of the energy sector, which is a cross-cutting component of growth, affecting household consumptions, affecting industry. And you saw what happened during the shock of the Ukrainian war, when energy price increased significantly. It became inflationary in Europe in particular. The main difference between the EU inflation and the US inflations was the fact that the EU inflation, European inflation, was much more energy driven, the supply shock, while the US one was both a combination of both energy, but supply, but also money printing. So there is that aspect that we have to take into account when measuring inflations. But despite the good news on the inflation front, as you mentioned, as you rightly mentioned, we are still way off the 2% target. And as you know, the last mile when it comes to targeting inflation.
But the U.S. economy also gained jobs.
That's true.
You should mention that.
That's true. That's
Yes.
true. That's true. There was, again, in the unemployment side.
Yeah. Let me go back overseas to Sam Faddis. You know, the tensions between Iran and Israel really at a boiling point. I mean, it depends on what you're reading in the next 2 hours, 24 hours. I don't even know if it's going to soon be an all-out war. I am curious to know from Sam I want to get back to the Abraham Accords and the shifting of the power dynamics in the Middle East, and can it in any way stabilize the relations with Iran?
I don't know if it can stabilize the relations with Iran, obviously because of the divide, the Grand Canyon between the Iranians and the Arab states. I do think that the Arab states in general are very eager to go back to where they were at the end of the first administration with the Abraham Accords and their relations vis-a-vis the Israelis. So I think that is a definite prospect. With the Iranians are kind of on the ropes. I mean, what's happening with them, for a variety of reasons, has not been positive. The Israelis have kicked them around, and Syria fell apart, and a whole series of things like that. But, you know, when you're talking about the possibility of nuclear exchanges, regional war, things getting worse, that level of instability and unpredictability is not good, right? I mean, it may be good in the sense that the Iranians are hurting, but it also potentially drives them to do things, be more provocative. You know, if they feel like they're taking it on the chin from the Israelis and Trump is actually getting ready to bomb them, back to one of my earlier points, might be the time you would expect they would touch off a nuclear device and conduct a test out in the desert somewhere and then announce to you, that was 1 of 12, and we're not telling you where the other 11 are. And then leave you to decide what you plan on doing. And if you start trying to take out those you think you have located, what you think they are going to do as soon as you do that. So, you know, instability equals danger, I guess.
So, Ryan, you are definitely in the world of intelligence. I mean, how likely is Iran to developing a nuclear weapon, whether it's in the future? Do you think they have one? And the global implications. And you also have heard the rumor, as soon as the last hostage comes home out of Iran, they're going to blow Iran's nuclear reactors to the tithers.
So one of the issues with Iran developing a nuclear weapon is that they have a finite amount of money. Mm-hmm. And when you have this finite amount of money, you can put it towards increasing the size of your conventional army, increasing your space, cyber, air capabilities, or you can use it to build a nuclear weapon. One of Iran's big problems right now is, let's say they do build a nuclear weapon. All right, well, how do you actually deliver it to anybody, right? They could say, all right, we have 12 nuclear weapons that are ready to go. But Israel just recently struck some Iranian factories, some of which have planetary mixers. Planetary mixers actually mix rocket fuel in a way that no bubbles develop inside the fuel. with these factories out of commission, it's going to take probably about another 9 months or so for Iran to actually build the rockets that they would need to launch a nuclear weapon. So the other issue with Iran is that they just had a horrible time with Israel essentially going wherever it wanted to go in their country in the air, and there was nothing that Iran could do about it. They mainly used the Russian S-400 SAM system. So right now, Iran is really concerned about how they can perform air defense. So if I had a choice between building a nuclear weapon that might not even be able to get to a target, or increasing my air defense so that way Israel can't just come into my country whenever they want and blow things up, I know where I'm putting my money, and that's toward air defense. So it's theoretically possible that Iran could develop a bomb, but you have a finite amount of money, and right now, air defense is probably more important.
And we'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, I must share this personal commentary before we return to this very important conversation. I don't know. I thought it was such a bad optic with the president, with that Tesla vehicle at the White House, trying to help Elon Musk. Did that bother you, Ryan?
I own a Tesla.
No, I'm talking about the president. Come on. I'm talking about the president of the United States.
I don't know if there's
Did it bother you, Ryan?
I don't think that particularly bothered me all that much. I have more pressing concerns with NATO
Sam,
than Tesla.
did it bother you? Was that beneath the office of the White House? Come on, please.
I would have advised against the President of the United States marketing a product.
Marketing a product. I have never seen it. If Biden had done this with George Soros, these conservatives would be off the chain. Thank you, Sam, for your integrity. I appreciate that. We must be the same and hold everybody accountable. Marketing Elon Musk's Tesla was beneath the White House. Now we'll move on. You know, Sam, when I saw the slaughtering of Christians in Syria, it was just absolutely shocking. What is happening?
Look, this group that's in charge in Syria is an Islamic jihadist organization, a former branch of Al-Qaeda that made a big deal out of separating from Al-Qaeda some time ago, which, in my opinion, in the interest of brevity, was nothing but a PR move. It impacts nothing about their attitudes. So you have a bunch of guys who are effectively Al-Qaeda in terms of their policies in charge. Their leader now wears a suit when he appears on camera. That's supposed to convince us that somehow he's a good guy. That also is PR. So you have a bunch of jihadists in charge, and you can either convert to their particular brand of Islam, or you can die. That's the way that works in reality. Everything else is nonsense and public relations. So what are they doing? They're carrying out their agenda. They're killing Christians from a whole variety of sects, and they're killing the Alawites, who are basically a spin-off of the Shia, and they're killing anybody else who's not, on board with their agenda, and they will continue. That's what they do. And I think Americans get really uncomfortable with this because we don't think in these very expressly religious terms, but these guys do. And there are still big chunks of the world where people actually just kill you because of your religion, and that is what is happening and what's going to continue to happen.
So, Dr. Fofack, obviously we're seeing these pressing threats to religious freedom around the world today. And Christianity is under severe attack, whether it's in the Sudan, and it's just, I mean, what do we do? Do we stand idly by and say nothing?
Of course we cannot. I think the Secretary of State Marco Rubio has actually made a statement toward the importance of preserving and protecting minorities across the world. It's something that we have to keep doing, emphasizing as the core of U.S. foreign policy, to make sure that as we push for prosperity in the U.S. and globally, but we also push for security across the board. And it's not just one aspect, but it's also very important that we move toward organizing meeting between different confessions, religious confessions, to create a platform for dialogue. And there's been a lot going on around the world in terms of bringing philosophers of different religions to actually begin the dialogue for peace, and through conversation, through exchange of ideas and philosophy. I think we can act on the political scene. We can also act by creating the condition where there is a discussion between those who are the leading intellectual and the philosopher in those religions to bring different communities together. It's very important for us to do that.
Ryan, in your travels around the world, do you think that Western countries, do you believe religious freedom is under threat? Is it an over-exaggeration? We don't emphasize it enough.
I haven't particularly seen religious freedom under threat. I think what you've seen is religious ambivalence, because to a lot of people in Europe, big old churches are gorgeous monuments, but people never actually go to them. The U.S. is probably one of the few places I've encountered where people still go to church on a regular basis, especially the younger people. But if you go to Europe, you don't tend to see that at all. So I don't know if it's under threat as much as the idea of Christianity beyond the secular Christmas and Easter Christians. I think it's under more of a threat of ambivalence than actual persecution, at least in Europe.
You know, Sam, how does the media and the global community respond differently to Christian persecution compared to other forms of religious oppression?
Well, to start with, they largely ignore it, right? And then they often work overtime to find some reason to blame it on the Christians who are suffering. I mean, what fundamentally all I'm really saying here, let's be clear, I'm not attacking Islam. I've worked in the Middle East for a lot of years, and I've worked alongside guys. Most of the guys we were working alongside were Muslims who were fighting on our side against the psychos, against the jihadists. I'm just saying, you know, let's be real. Let's just tell the truth. The guys who are members of Al-Qaeda and these other groups don't want coexistence. They don't want a homeland. They don't want you to leave them alone. They don't want to just have their own place. They're on a mission. That mission is to ultimately conquer the world for the faith. That's how they think. Now, that's really uncomfortable for us because we don't think that way, but they do. And if just because it's uncomfortable for you, you want to pretend like that's not true, well, the next thing you know, you're making excuses for guys like the folks that are now in power in Syria. They want to slaughter and eliminate everyone who doesn't come on board with their particular psycho version of Islam. And I use that word psycho expressly because you know who they hate more than Jews and Christians and so forth are any Muslims who don't adopt their particular variation of the faith. You are the worst. When ISIS burned a Jordanian pilot in a cage alive back a number of years ago, it was expressly because these are the fires of hell and you're a Muslim who was bombing us. So you're worse than any of the Christians or Jews. So nobody is safe from that. Again, it's not about Islam. It's about their own bizarre interpretation of Islam.
Dr. Fofack, what is the long-term economic, social, political, well, not political, fallout from the just shuttering of USAID?
I think it's, in fact, if you look at the way leaders across the world have reacted to the getting of the USAID, I think it's been more alarmist, the drumbeat of crisis befalling Africa and Latin America has been more within the US and Europe than actually Africa. If you look at the president of Ghana, for instance, has said, in fact, this may be salutary, it may be an opportunity for Africa to actually step up and enter the path of self-reliance. And of course, in the short term, it will be difficult for countries which would rely heavily on the US for HIV/AIDS treatments, for malaria, and many more. But it was always a risky move to assume that what was meant to be support for emergency relief will become a permanent fix for some of these countries. And the good thing about, the good outcome about Trump's decision to really end USAID is that as a result of that, countries are stepping up. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, they actually revised their budget for 2025, made provision of $200 million to cover for what was coming from USAIDs. And Ghana has done the same thing. I think South Africa is in the process. And so reducing that dependency on foreign aid may not be a bad thing. But at the same time, as much as foreign aid has actually helped in mitigating short-term crisis, the cost in terms of growth for this country have been very significant. Think of it, that 80% of USAID contractors were Americans, which essentially make it difficult for domestic entrepreneur to reap the opportunity side of any crisis in their countries. So in the short term, there will be some cost, but it's also an opportunity for the recipients to create a condition to build productive infrastructure the way America First is doing on this side of the world.
Wow, what an insightful, intelligent response. One that I've not heard Sam and Ryan. But then on that note, I think I'm gonna close the show on that, because I've got to. That's something to think about. And listen, hard to argue with. Hard to argue with. Thank all my guests. Sam agrees. We all agree on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the show as much as we did today. I'm Armstrong Williams. Thank you for joining us.